Hi there, everybody, and welcome back to the Economy and Future of Work stage at Cognition X. I'm actually quite sad to say that we are now coming to our final event after what has been a fascinating 3 days. We've talked about everything from health and well-being and the future of work in the aftermath of COVID-19 to how we're going to kickstart the economy using AI. But to close, we have a really positive session. What we're going to be talking about on this next panel is AI for good in action, a hopeful future. And I think that there'll be lots of excellent ideas about the ways that technology can be used to promote a more egalitarian, more inclusive society. And I'd recommend that if you see anything or hear anything that inspires you, to tweet it at hashtag CogX 2020. Moderating this session is Roopa Dandamudi, who's Senior Project Manager at XPrize. And I'm very glad to be handing over to Roopa, who will introduce the rest of our panelists for the event now. So thank you very much, and over to you, Roopa.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining us for our session today, AI for Good, a Hopeful Future. I'm Roopa Dandamudi. I'm with XPrize in Los Angeles. My panelists joining me are Arbel Vigodny, joining us from Israel, CTO of Zzapp Malaria, Caitrin Armstrong, CTO of Aifred Health in Montreal, and Emily Kennedy, who is joining us from Colorado, of Marinus Analytics, CEO and founder. So I'm just going to get started. This session is really about painting a hopeful future when it comes to thinking about AI and AI technologies. We often hear about, I think the average person, when they think about AI, there's some confusion around it, or they think about robots or, taking our jobs, maybe a dystopian view of things. But really, we're here to show you that that's not the case, and we have a lot to look forward to in the future, and how humans and machines can really collaborate to tackle some of the world's biggest problems. So I work with XPrize. XPrize is a nonprofit based out of Los Angeles. What we do is we run large global competitions that are aimed at solving some of the world's biggest problems through through incentivized competition. And we do that by, looking to the crowd. We don't have the solutions, but we know that someone out there does. Anyone can enter an XPrize competition, which is the beauty of this. It's really open to anyone who's got an idea and can meet our benchmarks. Established in 1994, XPrize, originally with the Ansari XPrize, which helped to create the space industry that we now know. That same model of incentivized prize competition has been used in other areas, from education to transforming carbon emissions to mapping the ocean floor. Currently, I manage the IBM Watson AI XPrize, which launched 4 years ago, with the intent of, providing real life proof points of AI for good in action. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to each of my amazing panelists to introduce themselves. Just a little background: each of these panelists are semi-finalists in the AI XPrize competition that is actively going on right now. So I'm going to hand it off to you, Caitrin. Why don't you start and introduce yourself?
For sure. So I'm Caitrin Armstrong. I'm the CTO of Aifred Health. And at Aifred Health, what we have produced is a clinical decision support system for doctors who treat patients with depression. More concretely, what that means is that we have a software offering. This software allows doctors and patients to collaborate on their care. So a patient will fill out some of the standard questionnaires that are related to depression treatment. The results of their answers will be recorded in this system. They'll be visualized in our software system. And then they'll also be fed into what we call the algorithm, which is a set of decisions that represent clinical best practice for teaching, clinical best practice for treating a patient with depression. So the doctor will step through this algorithm, which will aid both psychiatrists and family doctors who are most often treating those patients who present with symptoms of depression. And they will step through this until they reach the final stage of the algorithm, which will allow them to perform treatment selection. And what we do is we augment their decision-making process through providing them with predictions of how well an individual treatment will do for that particular patient. So let's say a patient has given certain responses to questions. Let's say that they are particularly affected by insomnia, by lethargy. It may mean that a certain depression treatment may therefore be better for them over another. Our machine learning algorithms identify this treatment, and they present these recommendations to the doctor. So on the doctor's side, what they'll see is they'll see a number of different probabilities of remission for each treatment for that individual patient. They can then use the information that our AI provides them to make the best treatment decisions for their patient. We do this because right now, in order to treat patients with depression, doctors have to go through what is essentially a guess and check process or a lottery process in terms of which specific medication or other treatment is best for a patient. Only a third of depression patients will reach remission through their first treatment. So it's very important, not only for the patients, but for their families and for healthcare systems as a whole, that we find the best way to get patients who are experiencing depression to remission faster. And that's what we at Aifred Health are working to do through both our clinical best practice system as well as the AI treatment predictions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Caitrin. Arbel, I would love for you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about Zzapp Malaria.
Yes, so my name is Arbel Vigodny. I'm the COO of Zzapp Malaria. And as our name suggests, we use AI to help fight malaria, and specifically by making malaria control campaigns more effective. Malaria is a big problem in the developing world. You may have heard that mosquitoes are the deadliest animals on the planet, and that is largely due to the parasite that they transmit that causes malaria, which kills over 500,000 people a year. Now, most diseases are tackled by developing new vaccines or drugs, but malaria historically has been eliminated by targeting the mosquitoes that transmit it. And many countries, including the United States, all of Europe, eliminated malaria at some point in the past century. So we already have the methods and the tools to fight mosquitoes effectively. It includes spraying houses, spraying water bodies, using mosquito nets, etc. The problem faced by developing countries that are looking to eliminate malaria is that they're limited in the resources available for these interventions. So campaigns must be very cost effective in order to be viable. So by using AI to plan the interventions, we can make sure that each individual community uses the optimal method or the optimal combination of methods to achieve the required goal. So for this purpose, our AI uses different algorithms to analyze the different variables that determine the effectiveness of each intervention method in different communities where an intervention is being planned. For example, it analyzes topography, climate data to estimate where water bodies that are suitable for mosquitoes are likely to form. And if we spray those, we can eliminate the mosquito larvae that live inside them. So we also use machine vision to identify houses from satellite images, and based on the locations of both water bodies and houses, our AI can predict where malaria hotspots are likely to be. And what makes the solution unique is that all of these conclusions made by the AI are then converted into quite simple instructions that are sent directly to field workers using a mobile app that we've developed. And the mobile app allows us to make sure that the recommendations are implemented in the field. And it also allows us to record data that we need to retrain the algorithms to constantly improve. In this way, we hope to basically accelerate the rate of malaria elimination because after several decades of steady declines in cases, we're reaching a plateau. Several countries have even seen an increase in cases in malaria prevalence. So applying technologies such as AI to deal with this issue could give us the advantage that we need to turn that around.
Amazing. Thanks, Arbel. And Emily, tell us about Marinus Analytics.
Hi, everyone. Great to be with you all today. As she said, I'm Emily Kennedy, president and co-founder of Marinus Analytics. And we started out of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in about 2011 when I was an undergrad, trying to think about how can we use technology to help solve one of our most pressing social problems, sex trafficking. It's one of the fastest growing types of organized crime, and it involves thousands and many, many victims every year across the world. And so we spun out of Carnegie Mellon in 2014 to create our software, which is called Traffic Jam. So Traffic Jam is an AI-based investigative software that basically looks at millions of data points online where victims are advertised and then applies AI to it to help investigators recover victims much more quickly and effectively, as well as dismantle organized criminal networks. So it uses a bunch of different types of AI, but I'll just name a couple. This includes things like image processing and image matching, so that, for example, a detective can identify the same bedspread pattern across multiple photos that might help them find multiple victims advertised in the same location. Another example is facial recognition, to take a photo of a missing child and be able to find very quickly where they're being advertised and conduct a successful recovery. So just one example I'll share briefly. We had a detective in the state of California who came across an online news article about one of these missing children. It had her photo. It stated that she was 16 years old and she was believed to be sold online for sex, and her family had put out the photo in the article in the hopes that someone would be able to help find her. And so the detective ran that photo through Traffic Jam and within seconds was able to identify where she was currently being advertised and able to conduct a successful recovery to return her to her family, as well as arrest 2 of her traffickers for human trafficking. So that's just one example. Traffic Jam is currently used by detectives across North America and Europe, as well as by select nonprofits like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And they use Traffic Jam every single day to process every one of the nearly 10,000 child sex trafficking reports they receive annually. So in the last 2 years alone, Traffic Jam has been used to identify nearly 6,800 victims of sex trafficking. And beyond that, we wanted to kind of in the coming years increase our impact by taking a focus on organized crime groups. These are groups that operate across international borders. They can have tens, if not hundreds of victims. And they have patterns and breadcrumbs that they leave in the data, but it can be difficult or nearly impossible to actually identify this activity manually. And so one successful case that I'll share briefly is that we identified a lead using Traffic Jam that showed what we believe to be a massage parlor operating with many locations across the United States. And these groups are often linked to organized crime due to the size of the operation and the financial potential to make a lot of money from it that's there. And so we passed on this lead, and it was pursued by FBI, HSI, Toronto Police Service, and the Oregon U.S. Attorney's Office, as well as local agencies. And they uncovered that this indeed was a transnational organized crime ring that was exploiting foreign nationals from China to brothels across 12 cities in the U.S. as well as Toronto. And so they conducted a sting operation, which included the takedown of nearly 500 website domains, as well as the discovery of customer logs, which held over 30,000 customer phone numbers. And so these are large groups, and it's very important that we use AI to help identify them. So our most recent development within Traffic Jam this year is that we deployed a graph database technology that helps users see connections across more degrees of separation, effectively allowing them to do sort of a social network analysis so that they can more automatically and quickly detect these patterns that these organized crime groups leave in the data. So those are just a couple examples. I'm really glad to be here with you all today, and we are firmly committed to this mission of seeing this horrible exploitation end, and we are really excited about the potential of AI to help us do that.
Amazing, thank you, Emily. So malaria detection, depression treatment, combating human sex trafficking, these are problems that humanity faces now and will continue to face for years to come. And I don't know about you all, but I feel inspired and proud to know that there are people like you all working to solve these problems with the use of technology. And so what's different about this particular XPrize competition, the IBM Watson AI XPrize, is that most XPrize competitions have one moonshot. You have a bunch of teams from all over the world competing to do one audacious yet achievable goal, to accomplish that. But here, as you can see, we have 3 different moonshots, and so that is just an example of how AI can be used for good. We have 3 concrete proof points in action, and hopefully this kind of shows the world what kind of future that we can all build together. So given recent events, it's been an unprecedented 2020 so far. It seems like every month there's been a new challenge, and we've all been feeling that. How has each of your companies, maybe had to shift or pivot in terms of business, how you operate? We're talking about everything from quarantining in the age of COVID-19 to the future of work to really putting at the top of our mind, thinking about inclusivity, racial and social justice in terms of maybe the customers and communities you serve. I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of how each of you are, adjusting your business or planning for the future, just based on the eventful year that we've had so far. Caitrin, why don't you start?
Sure. So for us, it's not really a question of pivoting, but rather a question of an increased sense of urgency around our mission. So depression was already such a major problem and cause of disability in our society. And unfortunately, we know that it will be even more so in the future, both now and in the aftermath of COVID-19. So there are a number of different statistics that are coming out now, a number of different surveys that are being performed, but just for a general sense, half of all Canadians are experiencing worsening mental health. 40% of healthcare workers are experiencing insomnia, and 43% of young adult Canadians are experiencing heightened anxiety. And that's just really, the tip of the iceberg. We know, I think we all can reason that depression will unfortunately be a major unfortunate outcome of the COVID pandemic. And so for us, really what this means is we have this greater sense of urgency around getting our solution out there for the greatest number of people so that we can help both them, their families, and the healthcare systems reach remission from depression faster. It's also meant that we've had to change our focus around, let's say, for example, telemedicine in the short term. We've worked already with our tool in telemedicine appointments. We successfully moved our current feasibility study to an entirely online-based paradigm. And it's not necessarily slowed us down in that sense, but rather just changed some of the urgency in our partnerships. So it increases the pressure a little for sure, but we're very, very committed to producing our solution for a good cause.
Thank you. Emily, I'd love to hear from you about, same question. How have recent events, sort of made you focus, refocus, pivot,
Sure. So, there's a couple things. Given COVID-19, our team has always been a semi-remote team, but given COVID and the quarantining, we moved our team to fully remote work a couple of months ago, as most, if not most, organizations have. And for us, it was a fairly smooth process because we already had the infrastructure in place that we rely on for that type of communication and work. I've been working from home and remotely my entire career, actually. So, I'm just personally hoping that this can be something that companies start to see the value in remote work, in saving some commute time and increasing quality of life. Even if companies just think about doing this once a week, I think there's a lot of potential, and I hope companies are open to that and how it can benefit not just their company, but also the people within it. And then also with respect to the pandemic, we've been kind of looking at our data that we collect and seeing how the activity has been affected. So we've been leveraging our ability to detect patterns and traffic jam of sex trafficking activity to inform responses to it during this pandemic. And although there was an initial huge drop in this activity, which can be expected, we've seen that activity grow back up to near normal levels now. And what this means for the vulnerable populations that our tools are trying to serve is that this makes these situations that are already dangerous even more dangerous for these vulnerable people. So essentially, we're looking at ways that we can use the data that we have to help inform responses, as well as help advocating for safeguarding of vulnerable persons, particularly victims who might be entering into sex trafficking due to the vulnerabilities that COVID has caused. So this is ongoing work, but these are just some of the things that we're thinking about.
Thank you. Now, Arbel, how has Zzapp Malaria adjusted to everything that's happened so far this year?
Right. For us with malaria, like Caitrin said, with depression, there's an increasing urgency, and it's partly because both malaria and COVID are public health issues, and there's some conflict in terms of where budgets go. But there's also a deeper issue since both malaria and COVID manifest with fever. While with malaria, you should seek treatment as soon as possible to get the drugs that you need. With the COVID, people often choose to stay away from health centers and self-isolate. Also, one of the more commonly used methods for malaria control, where workers go from house to house to spray against mosquitoes, becomes a potential way to transmit a different disease that people are less used to and potentially more afraid of. And some of our partners actually put house spraying interventions on hold. And during the Ebola virus pandemic, for similar reasons, there was an increase in the death rate from malaria. So we know it's especially important now to double down on malaria. So since our software is able to optimize and support less mainstream methods for mosquito control, such as spraying water bodies that don't necessarily require close contact with populations, we kind of took it as an opportunity to promote more COVID-friendly interventions. So while some of our projects that we were planning for this year were rescheduled for next year, just yesterday we actually agreed on a project in Ghana that will hopefully start this July with this more COVID-friendly intervention. But since malaria is seasonal, a 2-month delay for us can often mean a whole year's delay because we have to wait for the right season to start. So we've definitely been feeling the impact of COVID and have been trying to come up with ways to start projects remotely since we cannot travel, and implementing COVID-friendly ideas to make sure that we can move forward with development.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. I just was curious really about how this has impacted all of you. I know everyone's had to sort of adjust to the year we've had. So this question, the next question I have is for you, Caitrin. So we all know that AI has the potential to revolutionize healthcare. A lot of startups are looking to use AI to improve patient health outcomes, but at the same time, keeping doctors in that decision loop and is critical to the safety and of patients and as well as patient trust. So how is Aifred addressing this particular concern?
Thank you, Roopa. This really is at the core of our offering. So this concern and the actions that we do to alleviate this concern. And I'll divide my answer into 3 parts. So our platform, our software product, our AI, and then our actual company itself. So in order to ensure that we're keeping doctors in the loop as well as patients, we're really ensuring that the AI is not the one that's making the decision, it's the doctor. Mm-hmm. And our platform allows doctors the ability to perform measurement-based care so they can see through visualizations the patient's progress over time, the change in their status across a number of different measures. And then they can also step through our algorithm, which has the clinical, this best practice guidelines. And so doing all that in addition to the predictions that are provided with the AI is really designed in concert with doctors to give them all of the information that they need that unfortunately they haven't had access to before. A lot of our medical care systems are still paper-based, and just the simple act of giving these visualizations to the doctors gives them so much more power. Mm-hmm. All of this is built with the idea of enabling them to use their experience and judgment. We're not replacing doctors. We're just giving them the tools that they need to make better decisions around what is a very complex issue, depression and mental health care in general. It's not something that is based on a single variable. It's a really multifactorial problem. And then that ties into our AI solution. So our deep learning models take in a number of different features, and those features are questions about the status of the patient. So are you experiencing insomnia? Are you experiencing lethargy? Are you having intense negative thoughts? A number of different questions that are very standard and known to doctors right now. We're not working with these new questions, and we can benefit from all the clinical trials that have previously recorded all of this information for us. So that's how we're able to train and generate our models, is because all the clinical trials previously asked all these questions. And what we do is we use this information to make a prediction, but we also provide interpretability to the doctor. So we say these variables were the most important variables in making this prediction for this patient. In saying that given this particular drug or this particular treatment, this patient will have this probability of remission. So we give doctors that information. And then lastly, in terms of our actual company or organization itself, we have doctors on our team. We're working with doctors. We've had an ease of use study. We have an ongoing feasibility study. And then we will have a clinical trial to show the efficacy of our actual solution in clinical practice. And throughout every one of those steps, we're working very directly with doctors. Because we're not replacing them, we're simply trying to help them solve this very, very difficult problem that has a deep impact on society.
Great, that's reassuring to hear, and thank you. This next question is for you, Emily. So your startup uses technology like facial recognition to provide, a social good, which is helping law enforcement protect, our most vulnerable in society. But these days, when we hear facial recognition, there's a lot of sort of negative attention drawn to that. People are concerned with privacy or, our data being taken from us. What I'd love to just hear from you on how, what's the case for not pigeonholing facial recognition technology into that negative light, and what's the sort of case on why we should continue to improve upon it and use it.
Yeah. So I completely understand those concerns, and I think they're really, really important to talk about as our lives are becoming more data-driven, more digital. But the way that we look at it is that just like any tool that exists, facial recognition can be used for good, it can be used for bad. But what we've seen is when we see this type of exploitation happening right under our nose, we've seen that it can be a really powerful tool to help stop exploitation. So I'm going to share just one other story, and then I'll talk about some of the considerations that we're thinking about. But we've seen this be extremely successful. In one case, we had where facial recognition was very instrumental in corroborating the victim's stories, which can be really difficult when the victim comes with their story of victimization and obviously the trafficker is saying the opposite. And this case in particular involved an extremely violent trafficker. He had 21 different victims over the course of the time he was exploiting them. And the verbal, mental, emotional, and physical abuse that this trafficker put towards his victims really is so egregious that I won't mention the details here. We do have an article on our website that is under articles that's anonymized that shares a little bit more of the story than I have time to share here. But when we have observed this type of exploitation, it's very difficult to look away and do nothing about it. And so using facial recognition along with other AI tools in Traffic Jam, that detective was able to put together a case against the trafficker and corroborate the victim stories. And he did this in 3 months for a case that would typically have taken years to put together. And now the trafficker is looking at life in prison, and he's in prison right now. And one of the victims, in fact, the first one that came forward, she's now in community college and she's doing very well. So we can know it can have a life-changing impact for the better. But all of this to say, but we are cautious that there needs to be safeguards for its intended purposes. So in a lot of the public discussion, there seems to be two extremes, either no restriction at all or a complete ban. And I think there's an important middle ground. So a couple of considerations that we think about are restricting the scope of the data is very important. So for example, our data set is only publicly available data, and it's very limited to this topic. So we don't look at all social media websites or anything like that. So I think when companies are considering this, they need to think about what the scope of data is covering. We also believe that training is very important. So explainability of machine learning and AI for users to understand the results that they receive and to be able to corroborate that with other evidence from the case. So we are not at all advocating for a black box situation where a detective takes advice or a kind of command from a black box computer and then does it without any thought. Rather, the AI is just able to help bring additional data points to the surface and help highlight and prioritize the data that the human should look at manually. It's really a size of data challenge here. So again, we cannot, nor are we trying to, actually, as Caitrin mentioned, replace the human. nor should we. We are trying to just give better tools that help the humans get insights out of data through which they can make decisions. And then finally, we just realized that we don't have all the answers. So we have consulted and will continue to consult with ethicists and other people who are experts on AI ethics and can give us advice on potential misuses and what we should be looking out for. So we definitely see the benefit of policies to regulate technologies like this, but we think it's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater because we've seen the immense potential for impact that it can have.
Fantastic. Thanks, Emily. Arbel, this question is for you. As we're talking about human and machine collaboration, we as humans need all the help we can get to solve problems as big as what you all are addressing. Can you talk a bit about what it's been like working with local communities and partner organizations on the ground to help you deploy the use of your technology around the world?
So that actually has to do with one of our biggest challenges, which is creating a product that really meets the needs of the end users, which are the field workers that ultimately take our AI into the field and implement it through the mobile app. We work mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, which has over 90% of the malaria cases worldwide. And so to really understand the needs and the perceptions of our users, and to envision what an app-guided operation would look like, we spent many weeks engaging with local staff. And we experienced for ourselves the constraints, the limited connectivity, not being able to charge phones everywhere, also what different management structures are, and whether workers are more motivated by gamification or having clear instructions. And of course, we meet very different levels of familiarity with mobile apps and devices. So it was important for us to create a product that was both intuitive for the majority of our users to use, and also takes into account the challenges that they'll be facing in the field. And when you tailor the product to the person who will be using it, and you take the time to create training materials that are approachable, it's really amazing to see how people get excited about using new technology to solve the same problems they've been dealing with for many years and dealing with a certain way, and to see how it brings new hope. And with regard to the AI element specifically, most of our partners don't really have any preconceptions, negative or positive, about what AI technology can bring. But what often does come up in our discussions is the extent to which the technology is able to address the complexities in the operations. So we learned it was really important to communicate any limitations of the technology as much as possible. For example, we rely on satellite imagery to identify buildings, but where we work, things often change quickly. Satellite maps aren't updated as frequently, and sometimes there's a gap between what you expect to find and what you actually see in reality. So when we explain what our data sources are and how they turn into a plan for the field workers to follow, that is shown to them through the app, the users know what to expect and where the tech could benefit from their feedback, such as letting us know that we need more current satellite imagery for a certain area. So in our experience, it's very important to explain the technology, not necessarily in terms of the algorithms that we use, but in terms of the input and the output, and the inherent limitations in those. And setting the expectations right from the get-go leads to better collaborations for us.
Okay, great. Thank you, Arbel. So it looks like we've got time for one last question that I'd love to hear from each of you on. So why do you think that it's important to show concrete proof points of AI for good in action? One goal of the AI XPrize is to improve an AI literacy among the general population. so that they have an idea of, all the different ways that AI technologies can be used, for good. So I'd just love to hear from each of you, on, how having these proof points can drive towards that greater AI literacy. Caitrin, why don't you start?
Sure. So for us, it's really important that doctors, and then through them, their patients, understand what data is being used to make a prediction. And this is what we provide in our solution. So the doctors and the patients see exactly what data is going into our solution, because it's they themselves that provide it in their responses to these standardized questionnaires. And I think just that fact makes what we're doing a little bit of a black box. And then in addition, the interpretability solutions that we provide to the doctors enable them to get as much as is possible with deep learning, and we're continuing to research on all the options for that, to get an idea of what is actually going on in the algorithm so that they can learn to trust the predictions, and so that they know that they're not being replaced, but rather they're being augmented and given more information about what they can do in terms of depression treatment, because the doctors have information that they know is relevant to the patient, and then we have the ability through deep learning to look at complex, nonlinear, multifaceted interactions between all of our variables. And so really, when they can trust and know that they can combine their experience with what AI is able to do, we'll be able to improve the lives of the patients and their families. And I think just that, building that trust, contributes to literacy overall, and contributes to the feeling of security that AI can be used for good in other applications as well.
Great, thank you. We've just got a few minutes remaining, but I'd love to hear from you, Emily and Arbel, so on this question.
Sure. So just briefly, totally echo everything Caitrin said. I think we kind of have a similar challenge in that we're trying to work on explainability of AI to human users. So really focusing on prioritization, focusing on lifting the most important, in our case, leads to the surface is really important, so that the human can have a smaller, more manageable data set through which to process manually. So for us specifically regarding explainability of AI, it's about having good visualizations, especially when we're talking about kind of graph networks of organized crime. Visualizations are really big. And then also when we're talking about softer leads, like predictive leads, it's about displaying likelihood scores, having transparency into that users can use that to have context and make decisions. And these are all things that we're continuing to work on as AI continues to evolve.
Great. So we have a couple minutes left. Quickly, Arbel, I'd love to hear from you.
Right. So when we talk about using AI for malaria, most people imagine drones that spray water bodies on their own, or robots that zap mosquitoes. But most people who interact with our product only see a mobile app with a map interface that tells them where to spray or where to place a mosquito trap. So I think it lets people know that AI can be used for many different things in many different ways. Of course, we have self-driving cars, but AI algorithms and tools like neural networks and machine vision can also be useful for planning, for optimization, and that can be useful in many different fields and applications.
Great, thank you all. So I'm just gonna, close real quick by thanking you all for joining me today, and thank you to the audience and to CogX. I hope that you all are as inspired as I am about a hopeful future when it comes to AI and human collaboration. I feel that we're in good hands so far, just hearing the three of you talk about your work. For anyone who'd like to learn more about XPrize or the AI XPrize, you can visit ai.xprize.org. And you can also contact me. That's Roopa, ROOPA @xprize.org. Or you can contact us through the networking channels as well. So thanks everyone for joining me today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.